Howdy, folks. Welcome to the Jewish Cowboy Does Politics. I'm Clark Garen, the Jewish Cowboy, and this is my special guest, Robert Stone, who is a candidate this November for a seat on the Palm Springs City Council. And Robert, what do you think is the most important contribution you've made in your time living here to the city of Palm Springs?
Well, I spent about 5 years of my life working on the case that led to 31 felony charges against our former mayor and 2 local developers.
What do you mean working on the case?
Well, I built the case from the ground up, working with one other person. It was just the 2 of us working together. And we started accumulating, I could, you know, the corruption was so bad, I could smell it. And I thought, when you have corruption that is this blatant, and it was truly blatant to me. In fact, the district attorney, when he handed down these indictments, said it was a brazen scheme, and it was brazen. So I gave myself the task of finding out what is the mechanism of the corruption. How is it going down? How is it taking place? And I spent probably 6 to 10 months of advance work putting the case together and documenting it, and then bringing it to the FBI on April 10th of 2015.
So basically you figured out what was going on, and they used the subpoena power to get the evidence, the actual canceled checks.
Exactly. I had the scheme put together, and I knew it pointed in 1 or 2 directions, and I knew the 3 people who were involved. I wasn't exactly sure who
So who were the 3 people that they finally filed? They filed on John Westman.
John Westman.
The mayor.
The mayor, Steve Punier.
And who was the third one?
The other developer was Richard Meany.
Okay. So these 3 people, and they had quite, you know, before the program, folks, Robert was kind enough to share with me a copy of the arrest warrant for John Westman. This is a public document. It's in the court file. Anybody can go see it. And I have to tell you, it was pretty astounding to me. But to me, the most egregious thing was where the mayor and Westman worked together to steal $1 million from one of his competitors. Tell me about that.
Well, that was the Pedregal project, which your viewers might recognize because it's right on the corner opposite the Tramway Tourist Information Center. It's that big corner project there, which was started by a local developer named Dennis Cunningham. I've never met Dennis Cunningham, I've never communicated with him, but I do like his projects. I think he does good projects, and he's local. So he started to develop this project on the corner, which was relatively low-cost housing, single-family dwellings. He had graded the site, and then the economy tanked.
In 2007, 2008.
Yes.
And he lost his construction financing.
He lost the project to foreclosure.
Yeah.
John Westman, the indicted John Westman, came in and bought the project out of foreclosure.
So there was a foreclosure sale, and John Westman was the high bidder.
Right. He got it at a bargain basement price.
Now, as part of Cunningham's development, to get permits, he had to put bonds up to put streets and roads and sewers in. Is that right?
Exactly.
He bought a bond from a bonding company that guaranteed this would be done.
Yes.
And that was assuming he was going to develop it.
Right.
And typically, when you lose it in foreclosure and it's not developed, those bonds are forgotten about, and the new developer goes and does it himself, right?
Yeah, you no longer own the property, so why would you be asked to develop?
So what happened unusual with this one?
Well, so John Westman came into City Council, and John Westman petitioned City Council to require Dennis Cunningham, who no longer owned the property, to do all of the infrastructure improvements that are required on the property, even though he no longer owned it.
Now, what'd you do up in San Francisco?
Well, for the first 15 years, I worked for the Social Security Administration.
And then what?
And then I decided that I really wanted to live a life in another language, and so I moved to Argentina. I didn't stay very long. It was a terrible economy. I came back. I got a job as a newspaper editor, which I did for a year, and then I transitioned into just freelancing as the film critic for the paper and selling real estate, and I did that for 13 years full-time.
And you're still a real estate broker.
I am still a licensed California broker, although I don't work in the industry anymore. But that was a really good skill. So if you're looking at a scheme...
So that helped you to understand what was wrong with the city.
Yeah, tremendously. It was an amazing synchronicity between my skill set and the case that I was developing, because I had spent so many years as a staff analyst working for the federal government, so I could take apart a staff report really quickly and efficiently.
Okay. So what is the biggest problem that faces the city now, in your opinion?
The biggest problem facing the city now is a budgetary one. We're spending beyond our means. Right now we have $220 million in unfunded pension and healthcare liability.
Whoa. Let's break this down slowly. So,
Okay.
I'm a little slow. $220 million, that's $250 million
That's
roughly.
right. That's right.
And what is unfunded what?
Pension and healthcare liability.
What the hell is that?
Well, city employees, in every city in California generally, pay into a pension fund, and they have healthcare benefits that are provided by their employer.
They pay in part and the employer pays part.
That's correct. They play part, the employer plays a part. And the salaries and benefits that the city has been approving over the years have been very, very generous, particularly to the police and fire department and to the upper management in City Hall.
Okay.
And so this has been going on for a long time. And unfortunately, for reasons that escape me, only this year did we find out that we have this huge unfunded pension
Well, wait a minute.
liability.
What do you mean unfunded? What does that
Right
mean?
now, well, you have people who are out there receiving benefits, who are retirees, who are receiving benefits, healthcare benefits, and pension benefits. And the amount of money that's going to be needed to continue to pay those benefits, the city's share of keeping that going is $220 million right now.
Well, now wait a minute. Basically, the way I understand these retirement programs work, if I'm an employee, I contribute to a fund, and the city contributes to a fund, and our contributions over time are supposed to cover the expenses.
That's correct.
Well, so what happened? Didn't the city contribute?
The city did contribute. There is a problem.
So in other words, what they contribute is determined by actuarials, which are fancy studies to figure out what it's going to cost. So is the reason it's short is because those projections were not accurate?
In part. I
Okay.
think it's more, it has more to do with the fact that CalPERS took a big hit when the economy crashed. So all of the money that all the
Wait a minute,
cities...
why would the economy crashing hurt CalPERS, which is the agency that administers retirement benefits for the
right.
for state, just about everybody but the teachers?
Well, CalPERS gets all the money and they make all the payments. But there's so much money coming in, of course, they just can't sit on it. So they decided to invest it. And actually, CalPERS had been investing very wisely. They had done extremely well. It was a very well-funded pension fund. And then the crash came. And unfortunately, they had a lot of exposure when the market crashed. And so then they kind of...
Seems to me I remember them losing a lot of money on a
Tons.
Trump property.
They lost tons of money across the board. And so then they got scared. And instead of doing what they should have done, which is to just sit tight and wait for it to bounce back. And if you have anybody that has stocks, they will tell you the smart people just stood where they were, waited for it to come back, because it's come back over 100% since the crash. CalPERS freaked. They went and they invested in low interest, strongly secure bonds that would pay, that were less likely, if not impossible, to go kaput. So their return on their money has shrunk to a small amount.
But what does it matter what the return is? Aren't the benefits that are paid in enough to recover it?
They're not.
You mean they're stupid enough to project the profits they're going to make on their investments to cover the pensions?
You're talking to someone who worked for the Social Security Administration for 15 years. I can tell you about theft of pension funds in great detail. What they did is they just didn't cover their bases, and they didn't have enough money.
But I'm
So
still
what they're
trying to
doing-
figure out why. What did they do? Did they not collect enough money in the first place? Or did they not collect enough money because they projected they were going to make a profit on the investment that was not reasonable?
They had projections of what they felt income to the fund would be, separate and apart from deductions. And those projections just went down the drain as soon as the economy tanked.
Okay.
And then they started reinventing the way they do business, and they invested very conservatively.
But
So
they
now-
didn't increase the contributions to cover the shortfall from the income they weren't making.
Correct. So what they're doing is they're sending the cities bills for this.
Oh, the pension fund is now sending the city bills.
CalPERS is sending the cities a bill. Say, okay, you know, we can't cover all of this that we had agreed to, and so now you're going to have to make up the difference.
And that's where that $220 million
A
came.
large part of it, not all of it, but
Okay.
a large part of it, yes.
Now, what is the city doing to figure out how to cover this?
Not enough. There have been no discussions so far about how they need to reinvent the way we do business, and we do need to reinvent the way we do business. You can't do a line item correction. No line item cut is going to get you $220 million.
Well, how much is their whole budget?
Well, that's a complicated question. But
Well,
I have the answer.
their general fund.
The general fund
forget
is,
about
yeah,
the special fund.
The general fund is $110 million a year.
So in other words, this is twice their ordinary income.
That's correct.
Okay. Now they also have a special, like Measure J, for example.
Yes, they have.
How much is in the Measure J fund?
They have dozens of separate funds that they run somewhat off the books. They're somewhat on the side.
Let me explain this to our viewers. A special fund is something that is set up just like that. It's a fund. It has either a separate tax base or a separate allocation, and it's only supposed to be used for certain things, not things like police, fire, and general things.
Yeah. So the Measure J fund is generating about $12 million a year.
Okay.
And it can be used for anything.
Can it be used to pay the pensions?
It's supposedly a general fund, tax fund. I think they would run into problems with the voters if they were using it to pay pensions. I'm pretty sure they would.
But they could legally do it.
Legally, I believe they could do that.
Okay.
Yes. But the Measure J fund, the other thing you should know is this $12 million a year that we're getting on the Measure J fund, $3 million comes right off the top to pay the bonds that the city issued to give John Westman the $43 million that they gave him to build the downtown project. So it's all looped together.
Yeah. I was under the impression almost all of Measure J was paying for that downtown project.
Well, what
You're telling me it's only about a quarter of it.
Well, here's how it went down. They passed the Measure J ballot initiative to give a 1% sales tax to the city, and that's for 25 years. And once they got the tax, they went and floated a bond issue. The bonds that they floated were $47 million. $43 million went to John Westman, cash, into his pocket to do the downtown project. The rest of the $4 million...
I got a question. How much total did he pay in bribery, if you know?
Well, we'll never really know that because what the FBI...
What do they think?
What the FBI established, what they could trace, was $375,000.
Well, let me see. He gives them $375 million.
$375,000.
$375,000, and he gets $43 million. You know, maybe CalPERS should consult him on investment strategy. That sounds pretty good.
Well, yeah, I've thought that too. But you know, all we know is the money that they could trace. We don't know how much other money may have changed hands because it was not uncovered in the investigation.
Well, what's Measure J doing?
Measure J was 1%.
So this is 1.5%.
This is the 0.5%, yes.
The 1.5% that Palm Springs is charging, they aren't charging that in Cathedral City.
Right.
Not charging that in Palm Desert.
Yes.
They're not charging that in the county.
And here's how they're trying to sell it.
Well, no, that isn't my question. My question is, how does a retail business manage to exist and be competitive when you can go over the border and save 1.5% of your purchase? That's a lot of damn money.
It's a good point. What do you do when you go to buy a car? Talk about a lot of money. That's a huge amount of sales tax. And if you're going to register your car in Palm Springs, you're going to pay 1.5% more than you'd be paying if you bought it in, over the border in Cathedral City and registered it there. Because sales tax is computed based upon where the car is registered.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. But it just puts our businesses at such a competitive disadvantage.
And it's a regressive tax. The people who have the least amount of money are going to be the most seriously impacted. Because everybody has to pay sales tax.
So, are you in favor of this tax or against it?
I'm against it. In fact, I even wrote the ballot argument that's in the voter information pamphlet in opposed to Measure D. The reason is twofold. Number one, I think they're being fundamentally dishonest in the way they're trying to sell it. And I don't think you can build an open and transparent government when you lead with a lie. And what they're saying is simply not true. Okay. The other thing is that it's not going to do anything to solve the really critical problems we have with budgetary issues in Palm Springs. Another $6.5 million is nothing. It may keep us more current on our pension and health care payments, but it's not going to touch that $220 million unfunded pension liability. And what we're paying in Palm Springs, and really this is what it gets down to, and other candidates don't really want to discuss this, but it's true. We can't afford our police and fire department.
Okay.
One of the reasons that Palm Springs has this unfunded pension and health care liability, 60% of which is police and fire pensions, is because we have our own police and fire departments. Other communities down valley have subcontracted them out to Riverside County. Mm-hmm. So their liability and their pension obligation is significantly reduced by subbing out those services. Palm Springs has never done that. And it's killing us. It's really killing us. The budget for Palm Springs, the general fund budget for salaries, 48% of the salaries that are currently paid to City Hall employees are all police and fire.
So you think we should disband our own police and fire departments?
I'm not saying we should disband them. I think they're doing a good job. Let me be clear. I do not have a problem with our police and fire departments. I think they do a very good job. All of my interactions with them have been positive. They've been very professional. But it's a matter of math. We have to sit down and do the math. And then we need to make our decisions based upon what the numbers tell us, not what we would like in an ideal world.
So you think financially what we need to do is disband the departments and contract with the county?
We don't necessarily have to do that. We could do a reduction in force. One of the reasons that you may have noticed if you've seen the signs around town, everybody is on the bandwagon trying to sell Measure D. And the people who are most on the bandwagon are the police and fire departments, who know that without that, they're going to have a much harder time next year when their contracts are up for renegotiation, and they are up for renegotiation next year.
So what would you propose to do if you were on the council about their current salary and benefit package?
Well, there are certain loopholes in their contracts that I would close.
Like, for instance?
Well, these seem like small things, but they're not small things. One of the things that's troubling to me, so you asked me this question. This is not a simple question, so I'm going to give you the full answer.
Don't worry, I'll simplify it.
Okay. One of the reasons the pension and healthcare benefits are so insupportable is because police have a 30-year retirement program. They can leave after 30 years with 3% of their highest year's earning for every year they've served. So you can do the math, 3% times 30
So if they're there 30 years, they get 90% of salary.
They get 90% of their salary for the rest of their lives. Yeah. One of the things that the police do, and everybody in City Hall knows this, but nobody has shut this down. They don't get their highest base year, they get their highest year plus overtime. So what happens in the last year of a police or fire officer's service, every hour of overtime that's available goes to that employee so that when they retire, it inflates their pension.
They can almost double their pension.
That's correct. So
and isn't that a state law?
That's not a state law. That's something that needs to be closed. They need to close that loophole. Then there are smaller things that the police have been doing for years.
But that's one of the biggies is that by working overtime, you have the ability to tremendously increase your retirement.
Correct.
And that's just, and when in fact, the people who should be getting most of the overtime are probably the new hires who are making a lot less.
So just for example, we have 3 retired police chiefs, Lee Weigel, Gary Gendron, and Al Franz. Those 3 men alone, who are in their late 60s now, are getting $455,000 a year as a group in their pension and health care benefits. That is a huge number. This is only 3 people. We have a police and fire force of like about 280 people. And they did go back in 2013 and they recalculated the retirement pension formula so that it's not as generous as the original formula, but easily half of the people who are still working are under the original formula.
Now, are you aware who contributes to your campaign?
I'm aware of most of my donors, yes.
Are you getting donations from the public employee unions?
Oh, absolutely not.
This is one of my big problems, ladies and gentlemen, with particularly municipal elections. The unions basically pick a candidate who's going to be friendly to them on all their union issues. They give them a lot of money. They give them enough money so their billboards are on every bus stop and their signs are on every lawn. And we sit here and we who don't know anything about that see that name. Ah, that name sounds familiar. Joe Smith. Yeah, I saw him. Yeah, and then they go to the ballot and they put their X by Joe Smith, not realizing that Joe Smith is going to do everything the union wants him to do to increase the benefits for the union employees. It's kind of like the inmates running the asylum. And it's something fundamentally wrong in our political base. It's one of the reasons why I'm giving my airtime on my station to have lengthy interviews with anybody who wants to come on, so that we can find out who they are, so you can vote for a person instead of a name on the sign. And one of the most important things when I vote, I want to know who's getting the money from the unions, because I know that person is going to vote for the unions. They're not going to vote for me as the taxpayer. Sorry for that editorial.
No, you're absolutely right. What you said is completely true. And I have to point out, Lisa Middleton, who is one of my competitors in this
I just saw her name on the bus stop, by the way.
Lisa Middleton gets a $99,000 a year CalPERS pension. Do you think you're going to get pension reform out of Lisa Middleton? That's not going to happen.
Okay, how do you propose to solve the $220 million?
Well, first of all, we've got dozens, literally dozens of separate funds that are setting off on the side and are never fully integrated into our general fund. So we never really get a true picture of what we're spending, because we've got these dozens of funds over there. The aggregate amount of the value of those funds is equal to the general fund budget. It's another $110 to $120 million. So our real budget is more along the lines of $220 million a year, not just 110. So what I want to do, and this would be the first thing I would ask for when I sat down in that chair, is I want to bring in an auditor from the state of California, because there are 4 California cities that have already filed for bankruptcy. They're Vallejo, Stockton, Mammoth Lakes, and San Bernardino. The city of Richmond is now teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. So the problems we're having are not unique to Palm Springs. These problems are happening in other municipalities as well. And the state of California has realized the severity of the problem, and they've set up a special auditor general's office who will send an auditor from Sacramento to help out municipalities who are having financial problems and could ultimately be facing bankruptcy. If we don't successfully address this, we will be in bankruptcy. It's not going to be this year or next year or even the year after, but certainly within 10 years, if we haven't done a major overhaul of the way we do business, we will be in bankruptcy. And I think it's time that we bring in someone from the state, because they don't have any axe to grind. People who come in from the state are objective. They have no allegiances in Palm Springs. They have no one they need to please. They only need the facts, and they are willing to do the assistance.
So, yeah, let me flip a minute. When I walk down Palm Canyon, every so often I see all these homeless people around. Have you got a proposal as to an idea about what you want to do for our homeless?
Well, I would never be...
Besides export them to Cathedral City.
I think it would be arrogant for anybody to say that they have the solution on this particular problem, because honestly, I do not know a single municipality anywhere in America that has solved it. I come from San Francisco, which has one of the worst homeless problems in America.
Yeah, didn't you guys put up those little tiny rooms so they could sleep?
They're starting to do some small housing.
No, I'm just saying, I thought on Market Street they put up some little things with single beds in them.
They took old hotels and turned them into single room occupancy hotels. And there are quite a few of those in the city, actually. It's not enough to house the population. More people keep coming. And we have tent cities now all over town where people are living underneath freeway overpasses, underneath elevated freeways, We have a serious problem with drug abuse and mental health, and San Francisco is one of the wealthiest cities in America. Our problems in Palm Springs are not significantly different. They differ in volume, but they don't differ in type. The same types of problems San Francisco has, we have in Palm Springs as well. Unfortunately, we have no Department of Social Services in Palm Springs. We've never had a Department of Social Services. So we don't have the county resources that other municipalities would be able to rely upon. Indio is doing better than any of the valleys in the Coachella Valley in addressing the homeless problem, and I think one of the reasons is they have a fully staffed Department of Social Services in Indio run by the county that we do not have. So we've been having to catch as catch can. And for better or worse, Palm Springs is a draw for the homeless. It's like San Francisco is a draw for the homeless. I mean, we're the town with cachet. We're the town that has a little bit of a reputation.
So if you're a homeless person, it's more prestige to be homeless in Palm Springs than Cathedral City.
Exactly. And our merchants, our downtown restaurateurs, who have terrible problems with the homeless, have been generous in giving them food at the end of the day, but that has also compounded the concentration.
Because it's drawing more.
Because it draws more and more people. It's a very difficult situation. So I want to acknowledge up front, I don't have a solution for it, but I want to talk about the work of Abraham Maslow, who is a very famous behavioral scientist who, back in 1943, came up with what is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I will simplify it to its most basic. And what he said is that human beings in our society will never become a productive member of society unless they have food, shelter, and clothing. If you take one of those elements away, they will not be able to function in society. And I think he was right about that. So that's our challenge. How can we get food and shelter and clothing to people who are homeless? Then there's the other challenge, which is even harder.
How do you pay for it?
How do you pay for it? It's always about the money. And then, what do you do with the people who don't want to live within four walls? Because there is a significant homeless population that do not want to be housed. They want to live out in the open. Often they have drug addiction, alcoholism, mental health problems. How do you get them the kind of assistance that they need, and how do you get them to accept that assistance if you can find it for them? Because they don't all want it. It's a very complex subject. And here's how it's getting worse. Palm Springs is becoming more and more expensive to live in. Almost all of the people who work in our service industry do not live in Palm Springs. They live in Desert Hot Springs, they live in Indio, they live in the high desert because it's more affordable. Mm-hmm. And I've become really aware of this phenomenon, which is kind of heartbreaking, and that people working in the service industry are working for minimum wage, often more than one job, just to keep food on the table and a roof over their head. When you lose your job and you're living paycheck to paycheck, especially if you have children, it's even worse, and you fall out of housing, do you know what it takes to get back? So you've probably ruined your credit rating because you've been so far behind on your rent that you got evicted. You probably have outstanding bills that you haven't been paying. You're on the streets, and you suddenly have to fend for yourself. Where do you go? What sort of help do you get? Especially if you're an able-bodied person capable of working, but you can't find a job, how do you survive?
How do you feel about low-income housing for the city to do that?
It's something that's really important to me. I'm glad you mentioned it. Palm Springs has not built a single unit of affordable housing in 10 years. We have now over 3,300 units of new housing that have been approved for construction in Palm Springs, and there's not one single affordable housing unit among them.
Okay, we've been talking with Robert Stone, who is a candidate for the Palm Springs City Council. When is the election?
The election is November 7th.
November 7th. Be sure you learn about who all the candidates are, and don't forget to get out and vote.
And I want you to go to my website. If you would, go to stoneforcitycouncil.com,
okay,
all one word, and you can find out more about me.
Okay. Well, I thank you for doing. I hope everybody who's watching this show gets interested to get out and vote on November 7th, because if you don't vote, you can't complain about the outcome. Good night, folks.
Thank you.